Okay everyone, hello, welcome back. So I know that I didn't get a video out last weekend because it was just a busy weekend. Some things came up and I just didn't have time to film. And then I tried to film Monday night because I had some free time and the audio was terrible. There was some kind of white noise happening and I was in a room alone with the doors shut, and we still can't figure out what that noise was. It could just be the camera, so I'm gonna try it out today and see if it's bad again. And I'm in a different room, so it's not gonna, hopefully won't be the same noise, but if there is this annoying background white noise, something happening, let me know so I can figure it out. I might have to use a different camera. I don't know, we'll figure it out. But anyway, welcome back. I am going to be talking about some of my top favorite biographies, memoirs, and true stories. It was a request on the last video, and I've read quite a few in the last 5 years. I'm going to go year by year, my favorite ones that I read of that year. And yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna have to try to remember everything that I said in that video. It was long, wow, now I have to redo it. It's fine. I feel like I could have done some things better anyway, so you know, it's all turning out. It's probably a blessing in disguise because I can tweak some things. Oh my goodness, that's random. I just noticed this book used to be really red, like the pages used to be red and it faded. Did I have it in the sun somewhere? What the world? That's weird. Anyway, one of the other requests on the video was that someone would like to see me pick out a book and just one book and make a whole video about it and nerd out about it. And if there was any book that I could do that with, there's quite a few I could do that with. Who are we kidding? But this book, I love books. A Guide Through Bookland. Oh my goodness, this book is so amazing. It was in a box that we bought from an estate sale, and I asked my parents if I could keep it because I was the book lover of the family, and yeah, they let me have it. I don't know when it was printed because that page is torn out, and this video is not gonna be about this book, so just bear with me. There's a reason why I have it right now, but it is a fantastic book about, there's 4 parts of it: why we should read, what we should read, how we should read, and when we should read. So I thought it would be fun because it has so many good points in here, so many good quotes and poems, everything all about books. I figured I would maybe start just reading a section out of a book or just a quote for every video at the beginning of every video, I guess. So that's what I'm gonna do. And I thought, since I am doing a video on the biographies that I've read, I'm gonna read about why biographies are so important. So I'm including true stories and memoirs in the video as well. And this book doesn't particularly mention memoirs and true stories, but it's still basically the same thing because it's a true story about a person's life. Anyway, like, I could read the whole chapter to you. It's just that good, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna pick out a few things. A biography is especially interesting because it enables us to add other people's lives to our own. And I feel like that's one of the biggest things for me, is that I feel like I'm becoming a part of someone's story when I actually read it and become invested in it. And yeah, there's just so many reasons why we should read biographies and true stories, because we can learn from these people and everything they went through, the lessons they learned, and yeah, so many stories that are so inspiring and encouraging. We are naturally curious to know about people who have made their mark in the world. The story of how they succeeded is always fascinating to us because we want to make a success of our own lives. And so this is talking probably more about the biographies of great men and women that we have probably learned about in school or over the years, just super popular ones. But I think it's also important to read people's stories who are not very well known, because their story matters too. Even if they didn't make the biggest impact on the world, they made an impact in their family, in their community, and in their lives, the people in their lives. So it's important to read everybody's. We can't read everybody's, but it's important to read the lesser known stories as well. Good biographies enable us to get better acquainted with great people and great issues, with pictures and sculpture and scenery as seen through the eyes of the world's elect. Again, talking about the more well-known people, but somehow just knowing vivid, unusual folk make us feel enriched, and we get their reactions to the mental and spiritual life in the bargain. In the life stories of great men, we often find the real reasons for important events because we are able to glimpse the scenes behind the scenes. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I love about true stories, because I love history. I'm a massive history buff, and fiction is great in the sense that it kind of brings it to life, and we can imagine what a life was like back in that specific time period. But when we read true stories, we're actually getting the behind the scenes of the bigger event. So a lot of my books that I'm going to be talking about today are set in the World War II era time period. And so, like, these are all the things that are happening behind the scenes. Like, we know what all happened, or most of what happened during World War II, and the countries that fought it, why some countries were fighting, and all of that stuff. Everything that was going on, like with the Nazis and Hitler. But these are the stories that happen behind the scenes. These are the little details in the big picture that just makes it a lot more personal and personable, I should say, personable, because we can actually hear individual stories through that time period. It's fascinating. I'm such a nerd. Wow. Here, I'm going to read one more section and then I'll get started. Biographies and autobiographies of great men do more than almost any other books to encourage and inspire. It makes no difference what we may plan to do in life, whether we mean to be ministers, missionaries, doctors, teachers, or musicians, or whatever we want to be or do. The lives of leaders in our own chosen field will be a great inspiration. Finding out how they accomplished what they did brings to us the encouragement we need. They help us to see life as they saw it, and the story of their success will rouse us to make more of our own lives. It clears up our doubts and perplexities to walk and talk with these giants of thought and success. For a few cents, or even for the trouble of walking around the corner to the nearest library, we can add their lives to ours, and thereby make our own lives more interesting, more helpful, and more friendly. So, like, yeah, there are a lot of good stories and good biographies and true stories, memoirs, all of those things that we could read to learn from other people. So, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna go back to 2017. I have read, this is only what that took, wow, words. So I started keeping track of the books I read on Goodreads back in 2017. It's crazy. Doesn't seem that long, and I have read a lot of true stories and biographies before then, but that was when I actually started keeping track. So I'm going to start with 2017 and come up to what I'm reading now, but if I have time, I'm going to tag on some honorable mentions that I would have read before I started keeping track on my Goodreads account, because I did read a lot of very interesting and highly recommended true stories and biographies before that. But anyway, so in 2017 I read Outrageous Grace by Fabian. I actually got to meet Grace and listen to her speak at a Wycliffe Associates banquet that I was involved a little bit with bringing them to the town and hosting the banquet and getting people to come to the banquet. But anyway, she shared her story of how she and her husband, working with Wycliffe's Associates in Papua New Guinea, and how her husband was murdered one morning, and just, yeah, the journey of what took them to Papua New Guinea and everything that happened after her husband's murder, and learning to forgive the people that they were working with and the man who killed her husband. It's a really interesting story, and probably what made it more interesting to me was that I actually got to meet her and hear her speak and share the story in person. But yeah, it's a really interesting book. Oh yeah, she signed it as well. She said, "Let us take refuge in the truth that he is altogether trustworthy." So yeah, Outrageous Grace by Grace Fabian, a story of tragedy and forgiveness. In this memoir, Grace narrates the couple's life story of their separate journeys before they met to their shared life as missionaries. She tells the story of how she and her 4 children wrestled with grief and disorientation after Edmund's murder. She speaks of the family's quest for answers and of the difficulty of meshing 2 different worlds, the culture of the Navak people in Papua New Guinea and of her Christian heritage from the United States. So, it's a really good book. And then the second one that I read in 2017 was A Long Way Home by Saroo Brierley. This one is a story, it says on the front cover, "As a 5-year-old in India, I got lost on a train. 25 years later in Australia, I found my way back. This is what happened in between." And so basically, he got lost on a train and was taken, I don't really remember the details. It has been 5 years. But I remember just being so fascinated by the story of how he was lost, and I think he was in some children's homes and then was eventually adopted and taken to, or adopted by a couple in Australia, and he always remembered just little bit of details of his village and his mom and everything, of how he was separated and all of that, and just always wanting to go back and find his mom, find his home, find his village, all of this stuff. And when he was, let me see, it says here, "A Long Way Home" recounts the triumphant journey of a young man who rediscovers a childhood and identity long since left behind, an incredible story of survival and faith against all odds, a celebration of family and faith in all its forms. This is a book that will stand the test of time as a shining example of the extraordinary feats we can achieve when hope endures. So he used Google Earth to find his village before actually going back to India and going there in person. And he, like, yeah, it's so fascinating, all of the little details of how he found his way back. There's actually a movie out about it called Lion, I believe is the title. And that was really interesting as well to read that. I mean, to watch that after I read the book. So yeah, of course, read the book first. It's always better. You get a whole lot more details. And you can actually see into his thought life and thought process. It's stuff that you don't see in movies. So yeah. A Long Way from Home by Saroo Brierley. I hope I'm saying his name right. All right, moving on to 2018. I read a lot more biographies and true stories that year. The first one was Tortured for Christ by Richard Wurmbrand. In this important work, Pastor Wurmbrand documented how he and other Romanian believers met secretly for worship and fellowship and took great risks to evangelize the occupying Russian soldiers. Despite being tortured and imprisoned for 14 years for his obedient witness, he shared a message of Christ's love and forgiveness to his persecutors. "I love the communists with all my heart," he wrote. "Communists can kill Christians, but they cannot kill their love toward even those who killed them." A timeless and best-selling account of courage, tenacious faith, and unbelievable endurance and forgiveness. Tortured for Christ continues to inspire Christians around the world today. So yeah, this is just a fascinating story. I love reading stories of fellow believers in Christ who were tortured and persecuted for their faith, because it's such an encouragement. And I think it's so important to read these kinds of books, especially as American Christians, because we haven't dealt with a whole lot of persecution on a big scale. We've probably dealt with it a little more personally, maybe just people making fun, but nothing to the extent that these people have. And I just think it's really important to read that so that we can be encouraged and learn from them in their faith and their courage to stand strong no matter what they faced, because we never know what might happen here in America even. And yeah, I just feel like our hearts should be prepared, because Jesus did tell us we will be persecuted. So yeah, I think it's really important to learn from our brothers and sisters who have gone on before and who have lived through those persecuting times. And also on a more political who wants to go there side of things, he speaks out against the evils of communism and why it's so terrible. And it's actually quite sad because him sharing his story in a lot of places in America, even, people were always like, that's ridiculous, those things did not actually happen to you, communism is not that bad. But yeah, these people actually lived through it, so I feel like maybe we should listen to them and their stories. Anyway, the next one was Amazing Grace. I think I got this book off of Goodreads, or not Goodreads, I think I got this book off of Thrift Books or found it at a Goodwill maybe as well, and it does not have the dust cover, so it's just a plain book. But this is Amazing Grace, the story of William Wilberforce, who, by the way, is probably my hero. If I would have to pick anyone as like my hero in times past, it would be William Wilberforce. He was a young lawyer in England who was fighting for the end of the Atlantic slave trade, and he was a friend of John Newton as well, who wrote the song Amazing Grace. And if you don't know, John Newton was a captain of a slave ship, and he became a Christian and turned and became an abolitionist to try to bring the end to the slavery and the Atlantic slave trade. And yeah, there were so many things in this book that I was just, wow, blown away by, like, the information, everything that he went through. There's so many things about William Wilberforce's life that are just fascinating and inspiring, and everything he stood for. And he was also a believer, a Christian. His story is so inspiring. Like, if I would pick one book out of all of these for you to read, it would probably be this one, Amazing Grace, by Eric Metaxas. And yeah, there was back at the end, so obviously we all know that the Atlantic slave trade was ended, and so at the end when he won his case in court, I literally wanted to stand up and clap, and I cried as well, like with his speech that he gave. It's so inspiring, and just, yeah, the win he had, and just in winning the his case and bringing an end to the Atlantic slave trade. And there's also a movie about this called Amazing Grace, so you should watch that after you read the book. I don't even like mentioning that there's movies for these things, because I feel like a lot of people would just go watch the movie instead of reading the book, but you need to read the book. It has so many more details. So many more things that are so fascinating and interesting, and everything about his journey to becoming an abolitionist and all of that. So read it. William Wilberforce, Amazing Grace. Fascinating man. Incredible story. Belle. So, interesting story. I watched the movie, wow. I watched the movie first because I didn't realize there was a book out, and I also didn't know that the movie was actually a true story until I finished the movie and it said it's a true story, and I'm like, what? I need to know more about this story if it's actually true. And I found the book, and I will say that the writing of this book wasn't the greatest. So I'm going to just read a little bit of information in the back. In one of the most famous portraits in the world, a pretty girl is seated in the grounds of Kenwood House, a vision of aristocratic refinement, but the eye is drawn to the beautiful woman on her right. Pointing at her own cheek, she playfully acknowledges her remarkable position in 18th century society. For Dido, Belle was the illegitimate mixed-race daughter of a Royal Navy captain and a slave woman, and had been adopted by the Earl of Mansfield. As Lord Chief Justice of England, Mansfield would preside over the notorious Zong case, the drowning of 132 slaves by an unscrupulous shipping company. His ruling provided the legal underpinning to the abolition of slavery in Britain. From the privileged yet unequal lives of Dido and her cousin Elizabeth to the horrific treatment of African slaves, Paula Byrne, the author, vividly narrates the story of a family that defied convention, the legal trial that exposed the cruelties of slavery, and the woman who challenged notions of race at the highest rank. So the Zong case that this book is mentioning, that her adopted father resided over as the Chief Justice, Lord Chief Justice, it's mentioned in Amazing Grace, so that kind of helped tie in with William Wilberforce's case and in fighting for the end of the Atlantic slave trade and slavery in Great Britain. So, very fascinating story. And I love reading about things like this because these are actually personal stories of all of the racial tensions and messed up thinking back in the day when it came to Africans and mixed race people. So read it, very interesting. Next up, The Boys in the Boat. So we're moving on to the World War II era again, and this is a book, I know I said this about the Amazing Grace book, but if there is one book I would tell you to read, it would be this one, The Boys in the Boat. When people ask me what my favorite book is, this is one of them that pops up in my mind first. Normally. It's hard to pick a favorite book. Don't ask me that question. How are you supposed to pick a favorite book? But this would be one of my top favorites. And it's the story of 9 Americans and their epic quest for gold in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. So this would have been right around the time that Hitler was coming into power in Germany. So this book goes through the journeys of these 9 different boys from childhood up, and the hardships that they endured and how they made it onto the team and made it to the Olympics, the 1936 Olympics, and actually getting to see Hitler in person and then fighting for gold yeah, as the rowing team. It's so fascinating. And I actually cried at the end of this book because, or at least got tears in my eyes because I was so sad to finish it. I didn't want it to be done. I wanted more. Yeah, just reading about all of the different stories. So like I said, it starts from the beginning and their childhood and everything that they endured through the Depression era and all of that in America to the end of their lives. So it was sad. But it's really fascinating that everything that they went through. Drawing on the boys' own journals and vivid memories of a once-in-a-lifetime shared dream, Brown has created an unforgettable portrait of an era, a celebration of a remarkable achievement, and a chronicle of one extraordinary young man's personal quest. So yes, it's a very fascinating story, and there is no movie about it, but there are videos on YouTube, and I think a documentary maybe somewhere about their story, and it was so fascinating to watch the actual race video after reading the book. And it's really weird that we have film from that time period because it seemed like ages ago, but they actually had cameras there, they had it videoed, and you can actually watch the race happen. It's very interesting for sure. So The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. Read it. Highly recommended. Top favorite. Next up was It Happened in Italy. So we're still in the World War II era, and I mentioned this in my previous video, and it's this untold stories of how the people of Italy defied the horrors of the Holocaust. So one of the facts was, I think I mentioned it in the last one, was that 80% of the people who were of the Jews who were in Germany and Poland were actually killed in the concentration camps and at the hands of the Nazis, but 80% of the people who escaped and lived in Italy survived because of the heroic efforts of the Italians in fighting in the resistance against the Nazis and also Mussolini's men, I guess. And so, yeah, very fascinating story. It's a lot of details and a lot of research that went into it, and basically it just made me fall in love with Italy even more. But yeah, it's a very fascinating, interesting story of the heroes of the Holocaust and yeah, everything they did in defiance. And yes, very, very fascinating story. It Happened in Italy by Elizabeth Bettina. So that was it for 2018. And next up, I was still on the World War II phase because going end of 2018, going into 2019, I was reading a bunch of different stories during that time. So My Dearest Dietrich, this is actually written in a novel form, so it says biographical fiction, but it is based on a lot of research, so much research and journals and letters that were written, and it is a novel of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Lost Love. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer is also another one of my heroes, and so Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of the few pastors and theologians in under Hitler's regime who stood up against the Nazis and refused to preach the stuff that a lot of pastors were just giving into, and he was imprisoned for it and tortured for it and went through a lot of terrible things because of his stand against Hitler and the Nazis. And I didn't know this about this part of his story, about the woman that he fell in love with and their story and their journey. And it's so heartbreaking. Obviously the title, the little subtitle says a novel of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Lost Love. So it made me cry. But it was really a fascinating story for sure. And I loved it. And I want to read it again for sure. It's been a while, but yes. My Dearest Dietrich by Amanda Barratt. Next up, probably a very familiar story, Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. So still in World War II era. This is now about an American, Louis Zamperini, and it goes through his story as well, from starting from childhood and how he was like in the beginning of once America joined World War II, his plane crash and how he survived on a raft for I don't even remember how many days it was, and then was captured by the Japanese and held in a concentration camp as a prisoner of war in Japan, and the horrible atrocities that he was dealt with. And wow, it was terrible. Awful, the stuff that he faced. But what I found to be the most inspiring part of the entire story was how he was rescued and brought home, and how he found Jesus and chose to forgive the men that treated him so horribly in that camp. And yes, there is a movie about this one, and a lot of you might have already watched the movie or at least read the book or know the story, but read the book and then watch the movie. There's actually two movies. So the first one is more about everything that happened in getting stranded in the ocean and being captured and taken to the camp as a prisoner of war, and what he dealt with. And then the second one was his coming home and finding redemption and healing and forgiving the men that treated him horribly. So loved this one too. It's so interesting and so fascinating. Like the story of survival. Wow. Okay, now going back to a little bit of a different time period. This is End of the Spear by Nate Saint. Not Nate Saint, Steve Saint, his son. The story of Nate Saint and him being one of the 5 missionaries that were killed by the Waldani, along with Jim Elliot, and I can't remember the other names right now, but yeah, this was just another fascinating story. It's like you hear about these stories of missionaries that were killed, and like I remember hearing about it growing up, but actually reading the story and their journey of going down to the Waodani people in Ecuador and everything then that happened afterwards with his family. Yeah, it's a very fascinating story again, and I just find these stories so inspiring and encouraging. The sacrifices they made to bring the gospel to people who have never heard of it. And so I feel like these are probably some of the most important books to read as a believer and follower of Jesus, and it should inspire us to want to do more in carrying out the Great Commission, the final command that Jesus gave us as his followers, to spread the gospel to all people. And again, there is a movie about this, but read the book. Please read the book. Wow, it's so much. I can't say it enough. There's so many more details and so many more fascinating things that happen that just can't be put in a movie, or it would be too long. So read the book. Read the book. Okay, moving on to 2020. All right. Okay, so this is a memoir, My Lucky Life, In and Out of Show Business by Dick Van Dyke. He had me laughing already in the introduction, or the foreword, I guess, one of those. And I love Dick Van Dyke. In particular, the show, The Dick Van Dyke Show. And this is just kind of a witty, funny insight to his life, how he got into the show business, and yeah, his life through all of that. And it's just a really funny, interesting read, and it had me laughing so much. And it could just be that I'm just a fan of Dick Van Dyke and find his humor and his acting and his comedy, everything just hilarious, because I grew up on watching his show. it's the best. But so yeah, just a really funny, it'll have you laughing a lot. My Lucky Life, In and Out of Show Business by Dick Van Dyke. Read it, it's hilarious. Next up, 12 Years a Slave. So I picked up this one because of a challenge I was doing in January and February with Daughters of Promise. So I'll probably do this challenge again in 2022. That is weird. What the world? Because I usually do it at the beginning of the year. And I will probably document some of those things. But anyway, I read this one for this year, or the last year, because one of the challenges was to read a book written by a person of color. So this is 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup, and it's just his story of how he was a free man living in the North with a family and I think 2 children, and he was captured by some men who tricked him and he was sold into slavery then, and was in slavery in the South, in Louisiana, on different plantations for 12 years before he found his freedom again. And yeah, this book had me crying and made me angry at how horrible slavery was and is still today. But yeah, it was just a personal insight to how terrible the slavery was in America, because he was actually an educated man. He knew how to write, so all of this, he wrote this book himself, and just about his different experiences through all of that, and finding his way back home and escaping from slavery. And so yes, read it. We need to know our history. Read it. Next up, Under the Tuscan Sun. This is also a memoir by Frances Mays. And wow, If there's any book that made me want to just sell everything I have and go buy a home in Italy, fix it up, and just live a slow, quiet life in the Italian countryside, it was this book. Wow, it's so beautiful. Her writing is some of the most beautiful and poetic writing that I have ever read, and it's just so fascinating. She's also a gourmet cook, and so she has recipes and everything about how to make some traditional Italian dishes. And yeah, it's just such a simple yet beautiful writing and story of how they were fixing up this villa in Tuscany. It's such a beautiful book and a delightful read for sure. So, Under the Tuscan Sun by Frances Mays. Highly recommend it. It's so beautiful. Love it. Alright, next up is The Zookeeper's Wife by Diane Ackerman, and it's a true story about a couple who owned the zoo in Warsaw, Poland, over the time that Hitler and the Nazis invaded and took over, and how they brutally killed some of the animals in this zoo and took some of them as well, and just their fight against their resistance against the Nazis and everything that happened. And I picked it up after I was in Poland and in Warsaw and saw some of the after effects of what the Nazis did. I didn't actually get to go to the zoo, which would have been fascinating. I think it's still up and running. Again, obviously it was for a time not up and running, but yeah, it's just a really fascinating story about that time period, and it's a little bit different because it deals with the zoo and how the Nazis were attempting to make a pure race even with the animals, and finding exotic animals to have for Germany itself. And so yeah, really interesting story for sure. They also they would hide Jews in different places in the zoo, in cages and all of that stuff. So yeah, just their stand and fight against the Nazi regime. I'm going to read a little bit of the synopsis in the back. It's 1939. The Germans have invaded Poland. The keepers of the Warsaw Zoo, Jan and Antonia Zabinski, survive the bombardment of the city, only to see the occupiers ruthlessly kill many of their animals. The Nazis then carry off the prize specimens to Berlin for their program to create the purest breeds, much as they saw themselves as the purest human race. Opposed to all the Nazis represent, the Zabinskis risk their lives by hiding Jews in the now empty animal cages, saving as many as 300 people from extermination. Acclaimed best-selling author Diane Ackerman, fascinated both by the Zabinskis' courage and by Antonina's incredible sensitivity to all living beings, tells a moving and dramatic story of the power of empathy and the strength of love. So yeah, it's a very beautiful, interesting story set in Warsaw, Poland during the Nazi takeover and occupation of Poland. So yeah, very interesting. All right, we're coming to the end. I know this video is probably getting very long, but so yeah, this is what I would have read this year already so far. The first one, I don't actually have the book because it was borrowed, but it is a memoir, and it is titled A Mother's Reckoning by Sue Klebold. She was a mother of one of the shooters of the Columbine school shooting, and let me see if I can at least find the title and the book cover to show you here. There we go. Can you see that? A Mother's Reckoning by Sue Klebold. Yeah, just a heartbreaking, moving story of her as a mother of someone who did such horrible things in her community, and just everything she dealt with after all of that and coming to terms with what her son did. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful story of how she held on to the love of her son, and or the love for her son that she had, and not excusing what he did, but yeah, just bringing to light so many different things, and also brought a lot of awareness to mental health. And I marked it 5 stars. I didn't really write much of a review, but it moved me, it broke my heart, brought a deeper sense of mental health awareness, and just that we need to be aware, because sometimes we don't even see it. And that was one of the points she brought up, was that they were not even aware of how mentally sick he was to be able to do something like this. They could have never seen it coming. And yeah, we just never know how many people are actually hurting inside, and we need to be made aware of it more and be a little bit more sensitive to those types of things, because we never know how far they actually are and how close they are to either hurting themselves or other people. So yeah, it was just a very, very interesting and heartbreaking story for sure. And then the next one I read was Just Mercy. This is probably a fairly well-known story as well, about Bryan Stevenson as a lawyer in his fight to free people, in particular one man in this story, to get him off of death row because of his innocence, and how this man was wrongly accused and put on death row in Alabama, and just the messed up justice system that we have, and especially dealing with people on death row. And yeah, it just brought to light a lot of things that we just don't really see or hear about, and the things that actually need to change in our justice system. And yeah, it was just a call to empathy and compassion to the people on death row, and especially the ones who are imprisoned and accused falsely, like they're actually innocent, but it's so hard to prove that sometimes and get them out of prison. Yeah. I want to read a little section here. It says, "The power of just mercy is that it belongs to the undeserving. It's when mercy is least expected that it's most potent, strong enough to break the cycle of victimization and victimhood, retribution and suffering. It has the power to heal the psychic harm and injuries that lead to aggression and violence, abuse of power, and mass incarceration." And yeah, like I said, it was just a call to look at our own lives, look at the people around us, and know that we're all a little broken, and that we all need grace and mercy and forgiveness. And I'm not gonna go on a tangent, but wow, it just brought more awareness to our broken justice system and things that need to change. And yeah, it says here that we've become so fearful and vengeful that we've thrown away children, discarded the disabled, and sanctioned the imprisonment of the sick and the weak, not because they are a threat to public safety or beyond rehabilitation, but because we think it makes us seem tough and less broken. And moving down, it says, "I am more than broken. In fact, there's a strength, a power even in understanding brokenness, because embracing our brokenness creates a need and desire for mercy, and perhaps a corresponding need to show mercy. When you experience mercy, you learn things that are hard to learn otherwise. You see things you can't otherwise see. You hear things you can't otherwise hear. You begin to recognize the humanity that resides in each of us." And so I don't believe that Bryan Stevenson, the author, is a Christian, but it did bring out, I found it interesting that it did bring out that point of those of us who've experienced mercy, it should create a an awareness to the needs of other people and their need for love and mercy, and because of what Jesus did for us on the cross, that we were broken and he loved us anyway and took our punishment and showed us mercy, and the least we can do is extend that to other people. And yeah, it's really, really interesting and fascinating story, and I just feel like we need to read more books like this so that we can have a little bit more understanding and empathy for people, especially now and everything that our country is dealing with right now when it comes to racism and reckoning with what our country has allowed and has actually been written in the laws of our land. And so yeah, read it. Okay, so this is one that I am reading now, Escape from Camp 14 by Blaine Harden, and it's the story of one man's remarkable odyssey from North Korea to freedom in the West. I picked this book up at the store where I was working because it just looks so interesting. There's so little we know about how horrible the situation in North Korea is. Like, we have vague ideas and we hear about things, but the North Korean government is always denying that these camps exist when you can actually see them on Google Maps. Hello. But yeah, just his story of growing up and the horribleness that he dealt with, and the brainwashing that the North Koreans deal with by their government, and the propaganda that is constantly being forced into their minds. And yeah, just living in this camp and watching his own mother and brother being killed in front of him, and just so many other horrible things that he dealt with, and just his escape and coming to find freedom, and then sharing his story and bringing to light the horrible things that are going on over there. I haven't gotten to the point yet where he's escaped in the book. Like I said, I'm still reading it, but it's already so fascinating and interesting, and yeah, it just breaks my heart at what these people are dealing with over there. And yeah, just a call to prayer, empathy for these people, that the gospel could be brought to that country, that freedom could be found, that redemption and restoration could happen in that country, because those people deserve it as well. And yeah, I think these stories are very important to share so that we can not be caught up in our own little world and our own little problems. And while our world and our problems matter, I think it's so important to care about others as well and hear their stories. And yeah, just take our eyes off of ourselves sometimes and look at other people's suffering and care about them. And so yeah, Escape from Camp 14. It's very interesting so far. I really like it. I will say though, as a disclaimer, that there is a lot of language in this book. The terms that the prison guards use and call the people is horrible, but it is a reality there, and it is what these people are dealt with, and the shame and the being basically treated as less than human, and the name calling, all of that stuff. It is a reality that they live with, but if you're uncomfortable with reading language like that, then there's your warning. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting book. So a few honorable mentions as well. The Shadow of the Almighty. This is the story of Jim Elliot along with The End of the Spear and Nate Saint. It was written by Elizabeth Elliot, his wife, and their story of meeting, falling in love, and journey of going to Ecuador to share the gospel with the Waodani people. Next up is The Heavenly Man. It's the story of the story of the things he faced and the persecution he endured as a believer and as a pastor of the underground church in China. I also got to hear him speak in person, and that was so fascinating and interesting. The things he faced were horrible, but again, I find it so encouraging to read stories like this of people who stayed true to their faith and never once denied Jesus and just endured it because they found him worthy. And yeah, and like there's so many miracles as well, that and the supernatural power that was so evident in his life and in his story, in being in prison for his faith. So yes, read this one, The Heavenly Man by Paul Hathaway. And then of course The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, and her journey of her family hiding Jews from the Nazis, and then she and her sister being put into a prison, a Nazi concentration camp. So yeah, just another fascinating story of believers who were persecuted for their faith and for standing up against the Nazis and their horrible agenda. And yeah, just another encouraging and fascinating story. Yeah, I think this will probably be the last one, No Compromise by Melody Green, and it is the life story of Keith Green. So if you don't know who Keith Green is, he wrote the song Create in Me a Clean Heart, There Is a Redeemer, various very familiar songs that most of us probably grew up on hearing in the church, and just their journey to finding Jesus, and after basically experiencing or trying out every religion that was out there and finding freedom in Jesus. And yeah, Keith Green was such a radical believer, and it's so inspiring. His story is so inspiring and challenging. Wow, my toes were stepped on. It brought conviction to my heart and my life, and I just feel like there's so much that we could learn from Keith Green and his complete and total abandonment with no compromise to following Jesus. So yeah, this is one that I feel every believer should probably read to be inspired and encouraged by and challenged by. So yes, No Compromise by Melody Green. So there you go, my top recommendations for biographies, true stories, and memoirs. I feel like there's probably so many more that I could have mentioned, but this video was probably already getting too long, and I'm sorry if you have already read these books or have already known about them and you maybe didn't get any new recommendations, but maybe there's at least one or two that you did, and if you have already read them, great. But I do actually want to hear what your favorite true stories and biographies and memoirs are, if they're not already in this list. And yeah, just comment those down below, give me recommendations, because I'm always looking for more to read. Because like I said, I feel like it's really important to read other people's stories, and yeah, I love learning about other people and the things they faced in their life, and being encouraged and inspired by those stories. So yeah, if you have any great recommendations, please comment them down below, and yeah, I'll check them out. Also, let me know if you have read any of these books and if you liked them or didn't like them. Anything. Talk to me. So thanks for watching, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you liked what you saw. I hope you got some good recommendations in to add to the ever-growing to be read list. It's never ending, folks, but hang in there. This might help you narrow it down a little bit to what you should read next. And yeah, anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Hopefully, we'll see.